Today, I'd like to focus on color. And you read a selection from a book by Edward Tufte, who is a very famous data visualization critic. One quote from him that is well known is, "Color used poorly is worse than no color at all." And I think that's something to keep in mind as we're going through all of this material is, could you do this data visualization just as well using black and white, or maybe using texture? Is it something that could be photocopied? I think these considerations are maybe less relevant now that we're using computers a lot of the time, but it's still worth considering. So again, just a reminder about Jacques Bertrands' Semiology of graphics. We have these visual attributes like shape and size. Then we have quite a few that have to do with color, hue, value, and intensity. So we're going to talk more specifically about those. And then, like I was just saying, maybe you could actually use texture instead. So there's a short TED Talk that I'd like you to watch. I'll put it in the playlist for this class. Usually we would watch it together in class, but it's about how we see color. And then I'd like to just tell you a little bit about color spaces. So a color space is a mathematical model for describing color, and there's more than one of them. So there's a common one that's RGB, that's red, green, blue, and that's kind of the way that light works. So if you've used a prism to see a rainbow, you've probably noticed that set of colors. But if you've done things with printing, you've probably used CMYK, which is an ink-based system, where as you pile up the colors, they form into black, versus in light, where all of the colors together makes white. There's also the hue, saturation, and lightness, HSL, and hue, saturation, and brightness, HSB color spaces. There's probably more, but those are the ones that I know off the top of my head. So when we think of hue, that's probably what you think of when you think of color. So hue is kind of like, oh, is it red? Is it yellow? Is it green? Etc. And you can measure hue kind of like temperature or degrees, 0 to 360. Saturation is about kind of how gray something is. So I have an example here where I've gone from fully saturated red to unsaturated gray, and then there's gradations in between. And if you went to art school and took a color theory class like I did, you would have to do saturation studies. So this is actually some of my work from when I was a college freshman. These are pieces of work that I did in Professor Puhala's class at the University of Cincinnati. And I'll just say off the bat that this is like B+ work, and the images are a little bit poor as well. So in that class, what we had to do was take paint and create, first we did a black to white saturation study where we had to mix paint to go from black to white. We didn't get to use gray paint, and you had to mix it to try and do all the different gradations of gray. So at kind of 10 percentage point differences. And I can see that I didn't do a great job up at the top of the scale. Like, it's not possible to tell the difference between this black and then this sort of 90%. And then even, kind of the 80%, that's not looking great. This is the middle gray in the middle. And so we painted all of these chips that we had to cut them out into perfect rectangles. You can see I made some mistakes with my cutting here, and then glue them very neatly and put, this is another piece of paper that's glued on the top. Again, this is like sort of an artsy craftsy project. And then we did the same thing with a few colors where we had to do, again, that white to black saturation study, but then we had to do the same saturation study for colors like blue, purple, and green. Again, this is like B+ work. You can see the gaps between my pieces, and then this shouldn't look like that. This is showing that these look way more saturated than these bottom three scales. They should be kind of equally saturated. But I think that it's kind of an interesting assignment. I certainly learned a lot from doing it and still think about it many, many years later. I'm going to have you read a selection from Puhala's book as well, but this is the assignment that he gave to us. So this was a 3-page assignment, and it's just so beautifully designed. He's a design professor, so I also found that really charming. Is it had all these specifications about the materials that you'd need. You need paper towels, mixing cups, matte acrylic paint, and it's got specifications for all the swatch sizes. You need to put it into kind of an envelope that you create yourself. So I'm not going to make you do something like that, but I just think it's interesting to think about different standards in different academic disciplines. There's also lightness. So lightness is similar to saturation, but it is a little bit different. So in lightness, we're not going from saturated to unsaturated. We're going from darker to lighter versions of the same color. And if you're thinking about gray, it's basically the same as saturation, but you can see, like with blue, that it's not going from like black to white. It's really going from light blue to dark blue. And we could have a couple examples here. So this one has saturation and lightness. So this is HSV, hue, saturation, and lightness. And then over here, this is hue in the middle. That's the colors. And then saturation and value. And so you can see the difference that the one that has saturation and lightness is going from white to black, and then the one that has saturation and value is going from the really bright versions to the less bright versions. You can also visualize color spaces as cones. So if you wanted to think about the full color space, you could think about 3 sort of axes, and you've got saturation going from the middle out. So this is the very unsaturated color. This is the fully saturated color. Then you could think about value as going from the bottom to the top. So that's kind of from really dark to really bright. And then again, you can think about hue as this kind of like degrees, 360 degrees. So that's going around in the circle. Another color space would be the hue, saturation, and lightness space, which again, you could visualize as a cone. And I just realized when you watch that video, the TED Talk, it'll talk about cones in our eyes. The cones for the color model are a different kind of cones, but that's funny that both those terms are used in color. Again, this is some of my work from college. This is a chromatic saturation study. So it's going from a fully saturated purple to a fully saturated green, and then it's moving in that direction. I think this was computerized work, so it's a little bit nicer. But again, you can see that I didn't do a perfect job. This middle square is maybe too saturated, or maybe the ones that go around it are not quite as saturated as they should be. So that you can see too sharp of a gradation between these two colors. And we did these kinds of things as well for different colors. Again, I'm sort of like B+ work at design school, which is maybe why I didn't persist in that field.